Airport staff kicked Sistine Rose Stallone out, but regretted everything when her father, Sylvester Stallone, showed up. The golden hue of the sunrise bathed the bustling streets of Los Angeles, where the relentless flow of traffic never seemed to pause. Sistine Rose Stallone, 24, sat quietly inside a sleek black SUV as it rolled toward LAX International Airport. Her gaze was fixed on the window, but her thoughts drifted far beyond, to New York, the place where the biggest opportunity of her career awaited. She wasn't a movie star, at least not yet. But today, she wasn't just another traveler, she was an aspiring actress on her way to a casting call that could change her life. She had been invited to audition for a major film, a chance that countless others would kill for. But she knew there would always be skeptics, those who assumed she only got this opportunity because of her father, Sylvester Stallone. Rocky Balboa, Rambo, a Hollywood legend. His name was both a blessing and a burden. It opened doors for her, but it also raised the inevitable question, does she really have talent? Or is she just another name riding on her father's legacy? There was a time when she feared those whispers, but not today. Today, she was ready to prove that she wasn't just the daughter of Rocky. She was Sistine Rose Stallone, a true actress. The SUV slowed to a stop in front of the departure terminal. Sistine took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped out. She was dressed simply but confidently. Gray sweatpants, an oversized black hoodie, and white sneakers. No flashy designer brands, no oversized sunglasses, no entourage following her. Just a young woman with a suitcase and a backpack blending into the crowd. But, despite her casual appearance, there was something undeniable about her presence. A quiet strength, a confidence that echoed her father's aura in the ring. Her steps were steady, but deep inside, she felt a nervous flutter. This wasn't just another flight. This was a journey to prove her worth. The airport buzzed with its usual chaotic energy. People came, people went, rushed, hectic. Announcements echoed overhead. Suitcases rolled across the marble floor. Travelers called out to each other. She walked through the check-in area, passing couples saying their goodbyes, business people deep in conversation over the phone, families ushering excited children toward their long-awaited vacations. For them, this was just another day. For her, this was the day that would define her future. Sistine had no idea that, in just a few minutes, she would be thrown into a nightmare, one that would leave her humiliated, furious, and fighting to defend her own name. She didn't know that she was about to be questioned, insulted, and kicked out of the airport. She didn't know that today would be the biggest test of her patience and resilience. But she also didn't know that when the world seemed to turn against her, one person would arrive. Her legendary father, Sylvester Stallone. And when he did, everything would change. Sistine tightened her grip on the edge of the ticket in her hand, feeling discomfort spread through her body. She wasn't unfamiliar with judgmental looks, but there was something about the way Tina, the check-in counter agent, was looking at her that made her feel more unsettled than usual. Tina remained standing there, looking sluggish, one hand flipping through Sistine's passport, while the other tapped rhythmically on the desk, as if she had something to say but was holding back. She didn't have the expression of a professional employee. She looked more like someone waiting for a mistake to happen, eager to point it out. Sistine kept her gaze steady, but when she met Tina's eyes, she recognized something familiar: suspicion, scrutiny, and unspoken judgment. It wasn't because she was Sistine Rose Stallone. It was because she didn't look like someone who belonged in business class. Tina glanced at her again, this time her eyes lingering on Sistine's simple outfit. Sweatpants, a hoodie, sneakers, no designer dress, no extravagant jewelry, no appearance of someone who belonged in the premium cabin. She squinted slightly, and a smirk flickered across her lips, as if she was certain there had been some mistake. "Business class? Are you sure?" Tina's voice lifted slightly, carrying a deliberate hint of doubt. Sistine felt her body stiffen for a second. She took a deep breath and answered as calmly as possible, "I'm sure." But that answer didn't erase Tina's suspicion. She pressed her lips together, her sharp gaze flickering between the passport and Sistine, as if she were trying to find something that didn't add up. "These tickets are quite expensive," she said slowly, deliberately dragging out each word, as if testing Sistine's reaction. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a not-so-subtle reminder that Sistine wasn't supposed to have this ticket. Sistine's grip on her bag tightened as a wave of irritation bubbled up inside her. She had just been judged based on her appearance. She knew that if she let her anger rise, she would lose. She was far too familiar with people like Tina, people who looked at her and decided who she was based on nothing more than what they thought they saw. She didn't need to prove anything to her. "I know, it's my ticket." A simple sentence, but it carried a quiet, razor-sharp certainty, like a cold blade slicing through every bit of doubt. But instead of backing down, Tina still wasn't ready to let go. She frowned, picked up the ticket again, and held it up to the light, as if searching for signs of forgery. Sistine saw it, the look of someone desperate to find a reason to deny her. Finally, after what felt like an unnecessarily long moment, Tina reluctantly lowered the ticket, pressed a few keys on her keyboard, and printed the boarding pass. But instead of handing it over politely, she dropped it onto the counter, pushing it toward Sistine with a cold, dismissive motion. "Gate C-22, have a safe flight." No smile, no "thank you," no courtesy. Sistine picked up the ticket, her fingers instinctively tightening around it for a brief moment. She could say something, she could snap back, but no, she couldn't let this ruin her important day. She took a deep breath, gave a small nod, and pulled her suitcase forward. Even without looking back, she could feel Tina's eyes following her, a gaze not just of suspicion, but of something deeper, something laced with quiet resentment. Sistine felt a heaviness in her chest as she walked past the check-in area, but she forced herself to shake it off. She didn't have time to dwell on a rude airport employee. She had a flight to catch, a big opportunity waiting ahead. But what she didn't know was the real trouble was just beginning. The suspicious eyes wouldn't stop at the check-in counter, and she was about to be thrown into something far worse, something she couldn't just brush off and walk away from, because this time she wouldn't just be doubted, she would be kicked out of the airport. Sistine pulled her suitcase toward the security checkpoint, trying to shake off the frustration lingering from the check-in counter. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that it was just a minor inconvenience, nothing worth ruining her mood over. But a sense of unease crept into her mind, like the feeling of being watched. She stepped into the TSA screening area, where passengers stood in long lines, waiting to pass through metal detectors. She took off her hoodie, placed her backpack on the conveyor belt, and carefully removed her watch, just like everyone else. A routine process she had done dozens of times before. She walked through the security scanner, hoping to get this over with quickly. But, "You there, step aside." A firm, cold voice rang out. Sistine froze, her heart skipping a beat. She looked up to see a tall TSA officer, his hand resting on his belt, eyes locked onto her with sharp scrutiny. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Just a random check." He said it, but his tone and gaze told a different story. A familiar feeling surged back, the baseless suspicion, the unnecessary scrutiny. She glanced around. No one else had been singled out, just her. Another TSA agent, this one looking rigid and tight-lipped, approached and gestured for her to step onto a marked spot on the floor. He scanned her from head to toe, the same way Tina had at the check-in counter. "Open your backpack." Sistine blinked but complied. She unzipped her bag, opening it in front of them. They started rummaging through it, slowly, carelessly, unnecessarily. Her sneakers were pulled out, her makeup bag was tossed aside, her script notebook was flung carelessly. Sistine clenched the bag's strap, irritation bubbling in her chest. She looked directly at the TSA officer, searching for an explanation, but they continued their work. Or rather, they savored the small power they had. "What's this?" One of them picked up her script. He smirked, his eyes laced with mockery. "An actress? Trying to get famous?" The words seemed harmless on the surface, but they dripped with condescension. Sistine inhaled deeply, keeping herself from reacting. She was used to this. She knew this type of person, the ones who exploited their tiny sliver of authority just because they could. But the humiliation stung as she noticed the people watching, some curious, others awkwardly sympathetic. She felt like an actual suspect, despite doing nothing wrong. They found nothing unusual, but they dragged out the inspection as if trying to justify their suspicion. Time dragged on. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. When they finally finished, one of them tossed her script back into her bag with zero regard. "Next time, get here earlier," he said, a smug satisfaction in his voice, as if this whole ordeal had been her fault, as if she had just been punished for a crime she didn't even know existed. Sistine said nothing. She simply zipped up her backpack, hoisted it onto her shoulder, and walked away. But inside, something weighed heavy in her chest. She knew she wasn't the first to be treated like this, and she knew, without a doubt, that she wouldn't be the last. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning, because soon enough, they wouldn't just suspect her. They would strip her of her right to board, and they would throw her out of the airport like a fraud. Sistine strode quickly through the security checkpoint, trying to push away the frustration bubbling inside her. The irritation was still there, but she reminded herself that she had made it through. That unnecessarily long screening was over. Now, all she had to do was reach Gate C-22, board the plane, and focus on her upcoming audition. But as she approached the waiting area, something felt off. A group of airline staff stood huddled near the check-in counter, whispering among themselves. Their eyes flickered toward her, just for a moment, before quickly turning away. A chill ran down Sistine's spine. She wasn't someone who easily let other people's stares get to her, but this time something was wrong. Then a man in a suit stepped out from the group. His stride was authoritative but carried an unmistakable impatience. The name tag on his chest read, "Charles, Supervisor." He stopped directly in front of her, blocking her path deliberately, arms crossed. May I see your ticket again?" His voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. Sistine blinked, caught off guard by the request. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Charles lowered his chin slightly, regarding her with a sharp gaze. "Our system flagged your ticket as potentially invalid." A cold weight settled in Sistine's chest. "I already checked in. We need to verify it again." Charles's tone didn't change, but something about it irritated her even more. "Who purchased this ticket?" His question was precise, as if he were waiting for a specific answer, one that would turn the situation in his favor. "My father. And his name?" Sistine tensed for a brief second. She hated having to use her father's name to prove anything. She hated the way people attached her every move to his legacy. But in this situation, she had no other choice. She met Charles's eyes and answered, "Sylvester Stallone." For a moment, something flickered across Charles's face. His eyebrow arched. Then his lips curled into a smirk filled with nothing but mockery. "Oh, so you're Rocky's daughter?" He turned slightly toward the other staff, letting out a dry chuckle. "Well, isn't that something?" Sistine felt her jaw tighten. He didn't believe her. He didn't want to believe her. This wasn't just a routine verification anymore. This was deliberate humiliation. "We need to verify the payment details," he stated. "I have the confirmation email on my phone," she shot back. "We'll need more than that." Sistine gripped her phone tighter. "If we can't verify the purchase, we'll have to cancel your ticket." His words sliced through her like ice. Sistine stood frozen, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation. He wasn't questioning anyone else. He was only questioning her. He had no evidence to deny her ticket, but he didn't need evidence. All he needed was an excuse, and now he had one. Sistine took a slow, deep breath, forcing herself to keep her voice level, but this time the frustration bled through every word. "I haven't done anything wrong. I have a valid ticket. I passed security. If you need to verify something, then check your system instead of treating me like a fraud." But Charles only shrugged, his expression smug. He turned to one of the nearby staff and gave a small nod. "Pull her aside. We need to conduct a deeper investigation." Immediately, 2 employees stepped forward, one reaching for his radio, the other motioning for her to follow. Sistine couldn't believe what was happening. She wasn't causing trouble. She wasn't breaking any rules. And yet, she was being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of passengers. People were starting to stare. Some were even whispering. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was humiliation. And now, she had no choice. She had to call her father. Sistine felt the blood in her veins freeze. She stood there in the middle of the boarding gate area, surrounded by curious stares, murmurs, and airline staff who held the fate of her flight in their hands. She couldn't believe this was actually happening. "I have the confirmation email." She tried to keep her voice steady, raising her phone. The screen displayed her e-ticket, confirmation code, and flight details. Everything was valid, but Charles didn't even bother to look. "We need more than that." Those words hit like a cold, final verdict. Sistine felt her whole body tense. "This is a valid ticket," she emphasized, anger rising in her throat. Charles shrugged, his face expressionless, as if this was nothing more than a routine inconvenience. "We have the right to deny you boarding." Sistine gripped her phone tightly, feeling as though someone had just ripped away her basic rights simply because they could. "You have no legitimate reason to do this," she protested, her eyes flashing with fury. Charles folded his arms across his chest, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Our system flagged your ticket as suspicious. If you want to file a complaint, you can do so through customer support." He deliberately said the last part louder, making sure the surrounding passengers heard it, planting the seed of doubt that she might actually be a fraud. "But this flight is not for you." He gave a nod. Immediately, 2 other staff members stepped in from either side, closing in as if preparing to escort a troublemaker out. She was completely stunned. "What are you doing?" "Escorting you out of the security area." "I'm not going anywhere. I did nothing wrong." But her protest was useless. One of the staff members gently placed a hand on her arm, not forceful enough to drag her away, but firm enough to make it clear that she had no choice. Either she left willingly, or she would be removed in front of hundreds of passengers. Swallowing down the fury burning inside her, she tightened her grip on her backpack and stepped forward. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Some passengers watched with sympathy. Most just stood there, observing the spectacle as if it were some form of entertainment. Every step she took felt like a blow to her dignity. She wasn't a fraud. She wasn't a troublemaker. She was just someone trying to board her legal, rightful flight, only to be cast out like she wasn't worthy. The security doors swung open. She was shoved back into the public area of the airport, thrown out, humiliated. Sistine stood there, heart pounding against her ribs, feeling as if the entire world had just turned its back on her. No other choice. She took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling with rage. She dialed a number. The call connected instantly, and a familiar voice came through. "Hey, sweetheart, you at the gate?" Just hearing his voice made her eyes sting, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Dad?" Her voice caught for a second, but she quickly steadied herself, making sure she spoke clearly. "They're kicking me out of the airport." Silence. A heavy, weighted silence. Then his voice, low, steady, and cold as thunder rolling across a clear sky. "What?" "They're not letting me board. They're saying my ticket isn't valid, but I have all the confirmations. Dad, they just escorted me out of security." A slow, controlled breath came from the other end of the line. She knew exactly what that meant. Her father didn't yell. He didn't explode in immediate anger. But when he went silent before responding, that was when people should be afraid. "Stay right there. I'm coming." The call ended. Sistine lowered her phone, taking a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had seen her father angry before, but she had never seen him angry because of her. And now, the storm was about to hit. Sistine stood there, alone in the public area of the airport, her heart burning with both fury and humiliation. Everything had happened too fast, too irrationally. She had done everything by the book, had all the necessary documents, yet she was still treated like a fraud simply because they refused to believe she belonged in first class. All eyes were still on her, some curious, some indifferent, some slightly sympathetic, but no one spoke up. She gripped her phone tightly, took a deep breath, and tried to control her emotions. But then, as she looked toward the airport entrance, a real storm was about to hit. The screech of tires tore through the air. A black SUV came to a sudden halt right in front of the passenger pickup area. This wasn't some luxurious vehicle with a chauffeur stepping out to open the door. There was no glamorous Hollywood entrance. This was simply a father rushing to his daughter when she needed him the most. The car door swung open. A powerful figure stepped out. With a commanding stride, sharp, icy eyes, Sylvester Stallone wasn't just a movie star passing through the airport. He was a warrior walking onto a battlefield, every step radiating authority. Passengers recognized him immediately. A murmur swept through the crowd, phones were quickly pulled out, everyone realizing they were about to witness something far from ordinary. But Stallone didn't care about the eyes on him. His entire focus was on one person, Sistine. The moment his gaze met hers, the fire of anger inside her began to subside. But his eyes didn't hold comfort. They held the fury of a father who had just witnessed his daughter being humiliated for no justifiable reason. "Are you okay?" His voice was deep, steady, yet there was something in it that went beyond rage. Sistine swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "They took my ticket. They kicked me out of the airport for no reason other than the system flagged my ticket as suspicious." She took a deep breath. "I gave them every piece of information they needed, but they didn't even bother checking. They just wanted me gone." Silence stretched between father and daughter. Then Stallone slowly turned, his gaze sweeping over the nearby airport staff. Faces paled instantly, as if they were standing in the eye of an impending storm. Stallone stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air, clear and unwavering. "Does anyone here want to explain why my daughter was thrown out of the airport?" The entire area fell silent. Charles, the supervisor who had been standing at a distance, suddenly looked like he had seen a ghost. Gone was the smug shrug, the condescending smirk he had given Sistine earlier. Because this was not someone he could dismiss. A young employee leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Oh my God, he just kicked Rocky Balboa's daughter out of the airport." Another staff member swallowed hard. If this gets recorded and goes public, Charles is done. But Stallone didn't need the press to make them afraid. His presence alone had already changed the entire balance of power. He locked eyes with Charles. "You're the one who did this." Charles took a step back before attempting to regain his professional composure. "Mr. Stallone, I can explain." "I don't want an explanation. I want a legitimate reason. Our system, your system, or you." The words cut through the air like a blade of ice, making Charles stiffen. He realized there was no easy way out of this. Clearing his throat, he struggled to keep his voice steady. "Sir, we were simply following protocol. Miss Stallone's ticket was flagged as suspicious by our system." Stallone crossed his arms, his gaze never wavering. "Flagged as suspicious? And you didn't check? You didn't call the contact number on file? You didn't verify anything? You just threw her out?" Charles swallowed hard. "We have the right to deny service to any passenger if there are signs of fraud." A soft laugh rumbled from Stallone. But it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of a man who had just witnessed something so absurd. It was almost unbelievable. He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower, yet somehow even more terrifying. "The right to deny, or the right to humiliate a passenger just because you felt she didn't belong in first class? You didn't follow protocol. You didn't verify. You didn't do anything except rush to throw my daughter out. And now you're going to fix it." Silence. Sweat gathered on Charles's forehead as he realized that if he didn't fix this immediately, his career might end right here. He swallowed hard and turned to a nearby employee, his voice stripped of its former authority. "Reissue Miss Stallone's ticket and get her back on her flight. Immediately." But Stallone wasn't done, and apologized to her. Charles turned a shade paler, but he had no choice. He looked at Sistine, forcing professionalism into his tone, though the reluctance was clear. "Miss Stallone, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience." Sistine stared at him for a few seconds, then slowly nodded. "I accept your apology, but next time, don't judge someone just by how they look." And just like that, the balance of power had completely shifted. Charles felt his throat go dry. Everything he had once been confident in, everything he had controlled, was now crumbling right before his eyes. Sylvester Stallone stood in front of him, his gaze dark and razor-sharp, as if Charles had just made an irredeemable mistake. The murmurs around the area grew louder. Passengers raised their phones, recording this unprecedented scene. But Stallone didn't care about the cameras. He was focused on one person, Charles. "Mr. Stallone, we were just following protocol." Charles cleared his throat, trying to maintain professionalism, but his voice had lost its steadiness. His words hung in the air, weightless. He knew it. Stallone raised an eyebrow slightly, his stare as sharp as a blade grazing Charles's throat. "Oh, yeah? So your protocol includes insulting passengers, accusing them of fraud without evidence?" No one said a word. Charles swallowed hard, but he didn't dare respond immediately. The staff standing beside him felt the suffocating tension, yet none of them intervened. They knew they were facing a force beyond their control. Stallone took a step forward, an invisible pressure radiating from him, making Charles instinctively step back. "She told you she was my daughter, and you laughed in her face?" His voice wasn't loud, but each word hit like a boulder. The employees flinched, some avoiding Stallone's gaze, as if looking away could somehow get them out of this situation. But Charles had nowhere to hide. He was cornered, completely out of options. Sistine stood beside her father, and for the first time throughout this ordeal, she felt truly safe. But this wasn't just about her. She didn't want to rely solely on her father to reclaim justice. She wanted to speak for herself. Taking a deep breath, she steadied her voice. "They canceled my ticket, confiscated it, and escorted me out like a scam artist." Stallone narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening as he stared Charles down. "You have power, but you used it to humiliate my daughter. Now let me show you what real power looks like." No one dared to speak. Charles turned pale, realizing he had truly pushed things too far, and now there was no way to undo it. Charles felt like the whole world was closing in on him. The confidence he once had evaporated like smoke, leaving behind nothing but a growing sense of fear. Sylvester Stallone was standing right in front of him, a cinematic legend, a symbol of power, a man who could destroy his career with just a single sentence. And worse, dozens of phones were recording everything. The murmurs around him grew louder. "Oh my God, that really is Stallone. They kicked his daughter out of the airport? Who could be that stupid? This is definitely going to make the news, and no one will side with the airport." Charles swallowed hard, feeling sweat start to bead on his forehead. He had felt powerful when he ordered Sistine's ticket revoked. Now, that power was gone. Now, he was the one at risk of being erased. A female employee standing next to him whispered urgently, her voice filled with panic. "Sir, we're being recorded." "I know." Charles gritted his teeth, his eyes darting around the area. "If this gets out, we could lose our jobs." "It's not just our jobs. That's Stallone. He could take this to the press. He could make the whole airline pay for this." Those words sent a chill down Charles's spine. He had once felt invincible in his management suit, but now he was nothing more than a small pawn trapped in a media disaster beyond his control. Charles looked at Stallone, forcing himself to take a deep breath to stay calm. But when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its sharpness, its false authority. It trembled. "Mr. Stallone, we deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. We will immediately reinstate Miss Stallone's ticket and ensure she boards her flight without any further issues." He tried to maintain a professional smile, but it was twisted, strained. But Stallone didn't move. He folded his arms across his chest, his eyes locked onto Charles, the weight of his stare pressing down like a boulder. Then he spoke, his voice even lower, each word a punch to Charles's fragile ego. "I don't need a ticket. I need an apology. A real apology." The entire area fell silent. Charles pressed his lips together, his face burning red, but he knew he had no other choice. He was being crushed under the weight of his own mistake. He was facing the justice he thought he could evade. Slowly, he turned to Sistine. He took a deep breath. "Miss Stallone, I sincerely apologize for doubting you. We were wrong." Sistine stood still, staring at Charles. She could hear the reluctance in his voice, but she also knew he had no other option. But this wasn't just about her. This was about everyone else who had been treated like her. People who didn't have famous parents to stand up for them. People who had been humiliated, thrown out of the seats they rightfully deserved. People who had no one recording their injustice. Taking a deep breath, she gave a slow nod. "I accept your apology." She held his gaze. "But next time, don't judge someone just by how they look." He lowered his head, not daring to say another word. And with that, the balance of power had completely shifted. A tense silence blanketed the boarding gate area. Charles had nothing left to say. The surrounding staff dared not utter a word, and every gaze was fixed on Sylvester Stallone, the man who had completely turned the tables in just a few short minutes. However, the storm had not yet fully passed. The sharp sound of hurried footsteps cut through the heavy atmosphere. A senior airline manager rushed in, his face pale, his breath ragged, as if he had just realized the magnitude of the crisis he had to handle immediately. When he saw Stallone standing there, his piercing gaze unwavering, the man blinked rapidly, stammering. "Mr. Stallone, we deeply apologize for your daughter's unpleasant experience." He bowed his head, his voice trembling, all traces of authority gone. "This was a serious misunderstanding, and we want to correct our mistake immediately. We will upgrade her to first class." Stallone raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, as if he had encountered too many people like this in his lifetime. Just a minute ago, the airline had treated Sistine like a fraud, an unworthy passenger. Now, upon discovering she was Stallone's daughter, they were panicking, scrambling to make amends. Pathetic. A cold smirk curled on his lips. "Now you realize your mistake?" A simple question, yet it made the air even heavier. The senior manager frantically gestured to his staff. "Hurry! Reissue the ticket immediately!" Within less than a minute, Sistine's ticket was reprinted, this time in first class, as if they thought this upgrade could erase the injustice they had caused. 2 other employees approached her, their previous skepticism and arrogance gone. Now they escorted Sistine with the utmost politeness, as if they were serving a high-profile VIP. Sistine felt the shift, but it didn't bring her any sense of victory. It only reinforced a bitter truth. If it weren't for her father's reputation, they would have never corrected their mistake. If she had been just another ordinary passenger, she could have been thrown out of the airport without a second thought. She felt relieved to have her ticket back, but the humiliation from before still lingered, refusing to fade so easily. As they reached the boarding gate, Stallone stopped, placing a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You okay?" Sistine took a deep breath, feeling some of the weight in her chest slowly dissipate. "Better now, Dad." Stallone looked at his daughter, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "I'm really proud of you, for not letting this break you." Sistine met his gaze, warmth spreading through her despite the ordeal she had just endured. She knew that without him, she might not have made it through this. But, more than anything, she now understood. Justice doesn't always come on its own. Sometimes it has to be fought for. Sistine stepped toward the boarding gate, but before moving forward she turned back for one last glance at the airport. She saw Charles standing there, his shoulders tense, his face still frozen in shock. She saw the employees who had doubted her, now bowing their heads in shame. She saw the dozens of passengers still recording, knowing that this story would not be forgotten any time soon. She knew she would never forget today's events, but she also knew she was walking away with her head held high, and that was the real victory. Sistine stepped through the airplane door, the first-class ticket still warm in her hand. The airline staff now bowed slightly as she passed, their professionalism so exaggerated it felt almost artificial. But she didn't care about them anymore. She had already seen their true nature, how they had treated her when they thought she was just an ordinary passenger. She couldn't forget the way they had laughed, doubted her, and thrown her out of the airport without a second thought. And now, realizing they had wronged the wrong person, they scrambled to make amends, eager to fix their mistake, eager to please. Would this have been resolved if she weren't Stallone's daughter? Would anyone have listened if she didn't have a powerful father standing up for her? That question still lingered in her mind, but she knew. She couldn't let it consume her. As she walked down the aisle of the first-class cabin, she felt the curious stares of the other passengers. Some pretended not to look, but as she passed, she caught them glancing up from their phones or newspapers. Maybe some of them had witnessed everything. Maybe they had seen her escorted out of the airport like a fraud, and now they were seeing her return, head held high. A middle-aged woman sitting near the aisle offered a small, encouraging smile. Sistine responded with a slight nod before quickly finding her seat and settling in. She refused to be distracted by those looks. She had no time to care about what people thought. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes for a few seconds. It was over. She had fought for her justice. She had refused to be stepped on. But now, something more important lay ahead. The audition. That was where her mind needed to be. She wasn't flying to New York to argue with airline staff. She was going there to prove herself, to land the role, to step out of her father's shadow. No matter how difficult today had been, no matter how much doubt and disrespect she had faced, she had risen above it. The overhead announcement came on. Flight attendants began demonstrating safety procedures. Sistine leaned back against her seat and gazed out the window. The runway stretched ahead, airplanes parked side by side, their metallic bodies gleaming under the golden sunlight. The engines roared. The aircraft trembled slightly as it began to taxi. Gradually, everything on the ground became smaller, fading into the distance. She closed her eyes, feeling as if she was finally leaving behind all the negativity she had just endured. Sistine was no longer on the ground. She was rising. She was flying toward her future. New York welcomed Sistine with an air that was cold and sharp as a blade, yet inside her she burned hotter than ever. She stepped off the plane at JFK with a completely different mindset from when she had entered Los Angeles International Airport 2 days ago. No more anger, no more humiliation, no more feeling judged by people who knew nothing about her. Only one thought consumed her mind: the audition. This wasn't just another audition like the countless others before. This was the moment that could change her career forever. 2 days later, Sistine stood at the center of the audition stage, the bright lights illuminating her face. In front of her, seated in the judges' row, were the people who held the power to shape her future. The director, the producer, the screenwriter, they didn't care who she was or where she came from. They wanted to see only one thing. Could she become the character they were looking for? She took a deep breath, recalling every line, every nuance she had practiced for hours on end. Then she let herself go. Every emotion she had bottled up over the past days, the fury, the shame, the resilience, the passion, poured into each word she spoke. She wasn't just acting. She was living the character. She was no longer Sistine Rose Stallone. She was exactly who the script demanded her to be. No hesitation, no fear, no shadow of her father, no doubts weighing on her shoulders. The scene ended. Sistine took a deep breath, her eyes glistening, because she herself could feel the weight of the emotions she had just unleashed. For a few seconds, no one spoke. She could hear the pounding of her own heartbeat in her chest. Then, a single clap echoed through the room. Then another. And suddenly, the entire room erupted into thunderous applause. The director, the one who had sat with his arms crossed, silently watching throughout the audition, was now smiling in satisfaction. He nodded, leaning forward, his eyes filled with recognition. Brilliant, Sistine. Just 3 words, yet they carried more weight than anything she had ever hoped for. It wasn't praise for Stallone's daughter. It was acknowledgement of Sistine, the actress. She had done it. Night falls over New York, and the city's golden lights twinkle like stars amidst the steel and concrete jungle. Sistine sits quietly in her hotel room, her body exhausted after a long day. Yet her mind has never been so alert and filled with emotions. She stares at her phone screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, then pausing for a second, wanting to fully embrace this moment before sending a message she has been waiting to send for a long time. The audition was amazing. We did it. She reads the message one more time before pressing send. Not even 10 seconds later, her phone lights up with a reply from her father. "I'm proud of you, princess. Bigger than cinema." Sistine stares at those words, then leans back in her chair and closes her eyes. A soft smile appears on her lips, not the fleeting kind, but one born from deep, unshakable fulfillment. She has proven what she has always longed to prove. She has refused to let anyone define her, except herself. Taking a deep breath, she recalls everything that has happened in the past few days. The doubtful stares at the check-in counter, the humiliation and injustice at airport security, the mocking words from Charles and the way he abused his power. The moment she was thrown out of the airport like a fraud. She remembers the anger, the helplessness, and the pain of being treated as someone unworthy of respect. But she didn't let it break her. She stood up, she fought back, she proved her worth. Not because of her father, not because of power or fame, but because of herself. And in that moment, she realizes the battle was never just about a plane ticket or an audition. It was about something much bigger. Sistine looks out the hotel window, where New York City continues to shine brightly in the night, and she understands something important. If you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. If you let others define your worth, they will always undervalue you. And if you rely solely on someone else's name, you will never truly find yourself. She will never forget what happened at the airport, not because it made her angry, but because it taught her a lesson greater than cinema, greater than acting. It was a lesson about life itself. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you have the right to stand up and prove your worth. You deserve respect, not because of someone else's name, but because of who you are. She knows that out there, many people have faced the same kind of injustice. Not everyone has powerful parents to defend them. Not everyone gets the chance to fight back the way she did. So, if there's one thing she has learned from everything she has been through, it's that she will never stay silent in the face of injustice. She will never let anyone look down on her so easily. And she will always stand up, not just for herself, but for others as well. Sistine turns off her phone and leans back in her chair. She is ready for her future. This time, nothing can stop her. Sistine Rose Stallone's story is not just a personal journey. It is a journey for anyone who has ever been misjudged, underestimated, or held back simply because of their appearance or background. From what seemed like a small incident at the airport, she faced injustice, doubt, and abuse of power. But most importantly, she refused to be defeated. She stood up. She proved that a person's worth is not determined by others, but by themselves. Have you ever been misjudged like Sistine? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more inspiring stories. See you in the next video.